in its fullest sense is whatever your front line is, whether for many people, it's internal first. Your own front line. And you challenge that with your information or your conversations. And then once you get outside of your own way, now it's what do I do next? What do I do at my dinner table? What do I do in my community? What do I do in my classroom if I'm a teacher? What do we do in our school district? So whatever your front line is just step up and start to analyze and understand that I'm here as an active anti-racist. And if I see racism or feel it, I'm going to question it.
School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
I'm Susan Andrian.
I'm Megan Sweet.
And today we have Kyle and Kamal with us of A Long Talk, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. I'm going to hand it over to who wants to go first in introductions here.
I'll go first. So I'm Kamal Carter, and I met Kyle many years ago on Hampton University's campus, and I'm a father, activist, advocate, just someone who wants the world to be a better place for all of our kids and for just for every human being on the planet. And I believe that in order to do that, we have to have these conversations that have been ignored or whispered or just not even addressed. And so I'll kind of share a little bit more as we get started on kind of how I met Kyle and how we work together. But I'm here to form a more perfect union.
Thank you, Kamal.
I'm Kyle Williams. I'm from Plainfield, New Jersey, the birthplace of P-Funk. I get that in. I'm a father of three. I'm the son of many, a community. I'm a child of hip hop. I'm a Black man in America trying to make it a better place for my sons and for my community. And so I want to thank you guys for having us here, but I think, this is about being able to meet and talk to people just like you, so I'm just a person that wants to have this conversation. The best introduction for me is just to know that I'm here to have a conversation that we believe can change the direction of race in America.
Yeah, thank you both so much for coming, and maybe we can just describe a little bit about what is A Long Talk. And how did it get started? Like, what was the birthplace of it?
Well, I guess I'll first say, that America is going to be a better place, a better country when it lives up to this promise of justice for all, right? When it's free from the debilitating effects of systemic racism and white supremacy to hold us back and keep us apart. And I just think it's important as you hear about how this started for us, there's a need for this. There's a need for this, and I'll let Kamal kind of talk about where the birth of it is. But I think when people ask what is a long talk, it's a conversation that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. Conversation that is happening, and Kamal can kind of talk a little bit about how we got started.
Yeah,
why? Yeah,
for sure. So, even though this conversation for us is less than 12 months old, and A Long Talk did not exist 12 months ago, it was literally just getting started around this time. It really goes back to me meeting Kyle on Hampton's campus. I showed up to college as a freshman. I was barely a teenager. I had advanced, skipped some grades, and just got to a point to where I was on campus trying to navigate and figure out I had the academic skills starting college at a really young age, but not having the people skills. And Kyle saw me. He's like, you know what? Quit going to the library so much. Come eat with us in the cafeteria. And he became a friend, a big brother to me. Gave me books to read, and we formed a lifelong friendship. And so as we went on out into the world, Kyle got married, had three sons. I got married, had daughters, and just we lived our lives, but we shared these. I went to Plainfield, New Jersey, the birthplace of P-Funk. Kyle's mom, like built lifelong friendships, right? We had these moments. And when you have friends for life, really family, a brotherhood, when George Floyd was murdered, I was in pain. And I called my brother, and I was in pain. And I want to say this just out front, that I have not watched George Floyd die. When he was murdered, anytime the video would come on, I would turn away. I still to this day. So for me, though, living in Georgia, I knew what the expectation was. On that Zoom for my work the next day, I knew, just like with Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland, Mike Brown, there would be no acknowledgement. Hey, where's the spreadsheet? It would just be a conversation like nothing happened. And I was pissed because it keeps happening over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so I literally called my big brother, someone who many years ago had looked out for me. And as I said before, you all have people in your life that you share moments with and have conversations with. And I just said, bro, I said, Kyle, there's no way I'm going to show up tomorrow and pretend like nothing happened. I'm not going to just it keeps going. This is just, I was fed up. And so I'll let Kyle go from me because he can share. I had no idea what he was going to say or what he had been working on. I gave you all that backstory because this brotherhood, this is two Black fathers who went to a historically Black college, HBCU, Hampton University, who formed a friendship that years later had no idea what this was. But I knew that my teenage daughter was in pain in my house. My wife, I knew my friends and family. This was a talking point, and I was reaching out to have this conversation with my big brother. I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, and so when Kamal called me, I was dealing with it in DC. I'm in DC, the father of 3 sons, and you know, 2 of my sons are in college. One is in the 9th grade. My sons play basketball in college, and so we were in DC. And when it happened, when George Floyd was murdered, the next weekend they wanted to go to the protest, and their mother did not want them to go to the protest. It was COVID. There were rubber bullets. It was not a place she wanted them to be, and she just said, "Will you just go with them?" So no problem. So I went down to the protest right in Lafayette Square Park on that first weekend, and it was emotional. It was everything that you know. I mean, it was flashbangs and rubber bullets. It was protest. It was everything. And as we were coming home from that, we were just kind of quiet, driving in the car, and my son Elijah just started cursing in the back seat. And I'm like, "What's wrong? What's the problem?" And he's looking back at his post that he had made throughout the day, you know, going through a post on social media, and one of his teammates from school was reposting Tucker Carlson underneath his post. And so he was upset. You know, there were just comments being made, and he was like, "Hold on a second." And so he started to kind of text, and you know, they were kind of going back and forth. I said, "Just, you know, call him. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. Clearly not today. Like, that's not today, right?" But he called him, and it got worse because they FaceTimed each other. And so now there's a confrontation. There's literally a FaceTime fight going on with both my sons and this because the kid wouldn't back down. He didn't have any empathy. It didn't matter. But it became very confrontational, like seriously, like really confrontational. All right. And so I sat there and I was just kind of trying to digress from the day. So I just kind of was like, whatever. I mean, whatever. It was just up in the air. But then I thought about this coach who was in the middle of this, because the next day they were going to have a Zoom call on a team. And so I knew my son was going to show up with the same energy that he had on that call. And I wanted to prepare the coach. So I texted him. I said, "Coach, you should call me. You should call me tomorrow before your Zoom call. Let's talk about what's going on." And he called me that night. He called me right back. To his credit, he called me and he said, "Is it a good time to talk?" It was not a good time to talk. I had never talked to this man. Just like Elijah had never talked to that kid about race or politics. I had never talked to him. So a side comment from him could have taken us back to having the same conversation.
Right. So
I didn't know if it was a good time to talk, but I said, let's talk. And we talked, and he listened to me talk for 10 minutes about a pain and an agony and a frustration that I couldn't even hardly put into words, but that I wanted him to feel, that I understood really couldn't. Because come on, I've never watched George Floyd. That is no way I can watch 8 minutes of a black man's life being choked. There's no way. I've never even glanced at it. I can't. But when I shared with him what was going on with me, I understood that he wanted to hear me. He was a good guy, but he didn't understand what I was talking about. Like, we got off the phone, and I realized he didn't know what I was talking about. It wasn't that he didn't want to know, he just didn't know. And so, I kind of thanked him for listening. Didn't think much would change, but then we started talking a little bit, texting, and then someone gave me a link to a video. A friend of mine gave me a video link to the history of race in America, a lecture by Jeffrey Robinson. And I shared that with the coach. And I said, Coach, watch this. And if you really want to talk about what I was talking about, watch this stuff and let's talk. And he watched it, and then halfway through, blinders started coming off his head, and he started realizing, he literally texted me back, WTF, like, what is this? Because he didn't know about redlining and the GI Bill. He didn't know about the Tuskegee. He didn't know about these things. He didn't know about the true Confederacy and all. He didn't know about that stuff because he hadn't learned about it in his history books. And so when he understood that, he immediately realized what I was saying the day before. And he immediately became an active anti-racist because he wanted to make the world better for my son and safe for my son and for people and to make a better union, like Kamal said. And so that's how it literally started, as a conversation. It's not a DEI program. It's literally a conversation that is activating people and helping an understanding of why things need to change and need to change now. So I know that's a long answer to that question. But that's the origin story of where it led, because, and I'll even add that after I talked to my son at Gettysburg College. Well, as I said, I have another son that goes to the University of Pennsylvania. So I sent them the video. Like, I needed to talk about this. And so that's when that conversation, then he started writing articles in the Median. It starts to, I recognize that my two sons were safer. So my immediate goal. Yep. Go ahead,
there were so many points. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that and for responding with generosity. There was so much generosity in the way that you responded at each step of what happened that, I'm in awe of. The generosity when your son was in pain, and that moment that you said, well, call him. Like that generosity in that moment is incredibly powerful. And that even when he responded in the way that was still causing pain and harmful, that you continued to show up with generosity and sitting in the pain of it and not shying away from it, that allows us to move the conversation forward. And then you talked about activation and that we really can't change unless we're activated.
Right.
And so thinking about that activation piece, that emotional activation, and Kamal, I heard in your story as well, the visceral pain that you were holding in that moment, and that you reach out to your brother for connection, that we need that sense of belonging, connection. And I'm curious how you were able to come to such a generous space to be able to bring the conversation in a way that could be hurtful.
Wow. My mother once said that I found a way to turn my rage into something helpful, because when you describe it like that, that was a deep description. I've never thought of it that way, because I was trying to keep my sanity. I don't know if I was being generous or gracious. I was trying to make sense of a world that wasn't making sense. How could this person post that under my child's post on today at this moment? What would bring him to do that? I said, that doesn't make sense. So let me try to figure out the lesson and try I had to figure it out. So it's great. I love how you put it, but I want to make, like, I was at a place that I was either going to do something really, really good or really, really not so good. And maybe that was my mother talks about it. Maybe that was the grace that was just on me in the moment, because that day was not the day. It was just not the day. So I'm glad, I'm thankful that I could have found that generous spirit in that, because you're right. But it was more of me trying to give the world one more chance today. I'm trying to give y'all one more chance today, if that makes sense. I don't know. Go ahead, come on.
Can I just say this? Because I feel like, as Black people navigating white supremacy and racism daily, we have to pick and choose how much venom we let remain internally, and how we get that out externally. If it's through jogging, if it's through playing sports or listening to music or conversation, whatever that is. And so for me, I had felt like I had this shield. I learned how to wear this armor through life to protect my internal organs and my mental health. But when George Floyd was murdered, that my armor was pierced, and I had to call my big brother and say, "Hey, look, I help me make sense of this, right?" Because you're right to be generous in that time and to look for how do I get back to peace and maintain my peace so that I can survive and be here for my legacy and not let this what I experience daily, monthly, weekly, yearly eat me up from the inside out. So I was looking to return to peace, and maybe that's a mechanism that we've learned as survival. But I don't know, Kyle. Susan, Megan, that's I'm just reflecting on what you're saying. I've never looked at it, or even anyone's even asked from that perspective. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate what you said too, Kamal, around wearing an armor, right? And what we do, especially African American people, must do to survive every day, right? Like you can't live in that rage every day and continue to be productive, and like that's so what I'm hearing from you is like a coping mechanism. And I tried to describe that to my son once when he was mad that a game was unfairly reffed, and I likened it to racism, and I was like, right now that's every day for people of color in this country, every day, and we have to find a way to work. Like we have to work with that, but you can't be in this. He was just outraged and angry and stormy. I'm like this. We need to find another way. And the rage is also there and needs to be there. And I guess I think for me, I think what happened with George Floyd, just the length of time, how it was like, how clear it was that this wasn't appropriate, right? Like that this man was being killed in front of everyone's eyes, unnecessarily. I think pierced a lot of people's armor all over the place, so that they're so you can't hold that back in that moment. It's just so compelling. You can't kind of put at bay, or push away the visceral response to watching a man be killed in that way, and then remembering. And you guys started rattling off names, and we could rattle off names.
Could be here all day rattling names,
right? So I think there was something about George Floyd that pierced a lot of people's armor, white people too. So I think, as you were saying, Kyle, you're talking to, I'm assuming the coaches you were talking to were white identified. Yeah. There's a lot of like wanting to understand, but not getting it, right? Because what we walk through, so many of the things that white people experience, we just don't see it. I want to, right? I want to understand, but I can't possibly understand. And a lot of people, if they haven't been doing their homework or haven't been actively anti-racist, just genuinely don't know the other story of what's going on in the world, what other people's experiences are. So for me, I just think so much of what your story and the origin of A Long Talk just brings that forward of the pierced armor, and showing up in this moment in the pierced armor and finding those connections. So I just think it's really profound.
I hope that if nothing else, that pierced some armor. I think, when we think about, I've asked people the question when the trial went through and people were worried about what might happen. Like people were not 100%, black and white, we're not 100% sure that it wouldn't happen, right? And so you think about that for a second, that in order for us, we not even having security about that verdict, but in order for us to have that verdict happen, the entire world protested that act.
Yeah.
Never before has there been a protest that connected continents before.
Every continent, right? There were protests on every continent.
So think about it. So you had to have 9 minutes of video. You had to have a man screaming for his mother, his dead mother. You had to have entire continents protest for a year for us to say, I think we're going to get this one.
I know.
And so when you talk about this, the rage, James Baldwin has a quote, to be a Negro in this country and be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. And so when you really think about, like, I hope it pierced some armor. I really do, because if there's still armor up against this and these type of actions, then that's battleground material. Like that's somebody deciding to not just be ignorant, but to wear armor to go against that.
Yeah,
and that's the space that way. And that's what the one thing I do love about now is that people are the ignorance. The ignorance. This is a war on ignorance right now. It's an age of enlightenment. It's a new one. So you cannot claim ignorance anymore. Anyone who chooses to claim ignorance about Tulsa after this weekend and you've chosen to do that. Like, you're no longer ignorant. You have chosen a space of lack of knowledge. So it's important for us to move in the space that we're in right now to figure out how to make all that come together and connect, because we have to, like, if not now, I don't know how many more times we're going to revisit this conversation.
So we are up at our first break. It's hard to break because it's just so important and powerful.
It's a great time, though.
It was great timing because I think that issue of you can no longer claim ignorance. I think is a really important point, and that we can pause on that and come back and continue to talk about now that ignorance is no longer an excuse that can be used. Where do we go from here? What is A Long Talk doing to be able to help move this conversation forward?
Hey listeners, are you enjoying this show and do you want to hear more? Then please subscribe to our show on your favorite streaming platform. Like this show and tell others about us. We're available on Castbox, Deezer, Podcast Addict, Podchaser, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, and Apple Podcasts. So please connect with us there. You also can watch shows live being recorded on our Facebook site, The Awakening Educator. You can connect with us via Instagram or Twitter at The Awakening Educator. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter. We've been busy recording a ton of terrific shows that will be rolling out over the rest of this year. So we would love to be able to have you be a regular member of our community. Thank you so much and have a great, great day.
Hey, welcome back.
So Susan, before we went on break, you said, right, this is a moment, and I agree, Kyle, this is no more can people claim ignorance to, and not just George Floyd, but it was George Floyd followed up many individuals before George Floyd. And then immediately afterward, again, we can name a lot of names that followed afterwards.
Dante Wright, Breonna Taylor.
Right. And yeah. And not just, by police and not by police. So I think the benefit of this year, if nothing else, and everyone being home and COVID and having so much coverage of these murders is that it's not a one-off. It's not an isolated incident. It is a pattern, and the scales are coming off people's eyes. So now that they're coming off, or at least the opening is there, what does the long talk do there?
Well, we recognize that, today it's just not enough people that have learned the extent to which our country was founded on racism and systemic oppression. They don't realize that racism goes far beyond individual attitudes and uses American institutions to this day. Some know the history. Some people do know the history, but they're stuck in a place of seeing themselves as just personally not racist, right? And just not sure what to do. And so what A Long Talk does is we're an initiative that provides the tools for someone to be a vocal, effective anti-racist at home, at work, in the community. It's a powerful, transformative journey, really, that we go through, where the stolen history is talked about, open, honest discussion to be able to touch on different points. We're giving them tools to fight these conversations and to push back and to use, their voice for good. And so as we look at A Long Talk as an experience that provides ongoing support, so even going through our conversations, but then joining our community is even bigger than that. It's really something, it's hard to describe, because it's something you experience. It's not a checkbox DEI program. It's an experience. It's a conversation that is living, that's active, that's going on all around us right now with our participants. Over 1,500 people have gone through it in the last year. We've had some, and I don't even want to say success because we're just getting started. So it's about, we've had some incredible success stories that are where people are being activated and energized. So that's what we're building.
Kyle, I did want to say that it's important to note that it's an active learning community. It's not, we just don't get together, read books, watch movies. We do have a component where we have book discussions, movie discussions every month. We ask our community members to watch a movie, look at it through a different lens, but beyond that, we challenge our community and we support our community with what are we going to do with this newfound information? Not just say that I understand what it means to be anti-racist, but how do I exercise and do something on a local, national, and international level? So yeah, I definitely want to point that out, is that we have many touch points. It is a learning community, but it's an active learning community. When we learn, we expect our team to step up and look around and say, hey, look, we need to do something. Wherever my space is, wherever my front line is, I can be the change. And I can, even if it's small, it doesn't matter. One action, one more action, amplified it grows exponentially.
Well, I appreciate that. And Kylie, you said it's not another DEI program. And frankly, I've gotten quite impatient with seeing the number of DEI programs that are being put out. I feel like you turn around every day and someone's like, yeah, we were offering a DEI program. And what I've seen most of the time, and I imagine you two have as well, it's a little bit of a one and done moment. It's not really actually, you can't do DEI in a one and done, or packaged program. It requires conversation. It requires ongoing investigation. I love that you share different resources for folks to look at and then talk about together, because the conversation, this is what I meant in the beginning when I said it's so simple and so profound. Like, conversation is the thing. And we have to be willing to step up and make mistakes and ask questions and be curious and be pushed. And you can't do that quickly. It's, I often say to Susan, I discovered that I was a white person with privilege at 21. So, and so 27 years later, I'm still discovering that. I'm still figuring that out. I'm still working with that. I'm still making mistakes. I'm still trying to understand more. And I had the benefit of some of those long talks. I happen to have some really wonderful teaching partner who had those long talks. I mean, we had long talks every day. And I absolutely credit him for a lot of the reasons why I am as aware as I am, and still missing some things along the way for sure. But it's a conversation, and it can't be done quickly, and it can't be transactional. So I just appreciate that. And it's one of the things that makes me so actually really concerned in this moment, because I think when we have these quick one and done conversations, it causes more harm. It makes everyone feel exposed and uncomfortable and open in a way that, and then if that doesn't get taken care of, just deepens those scars.
There's a couple of things that I'm curious about. I mean, there's many things I'm curious about, but things that are coming up right now. And I spend a lot of time thinking about the brain and trauma. I do a lot of training around trauma, and I've been training with Dr. Bruce Perry for the last couple of years. And I always start with the understanding that trauma is both historical, systemic, interpersonal, and individual, right? We have to look at it from this perspective, and really thinking about racism. And I was thinking about what you said, Kyle, around ignorance, right? You can no longer claim ignorance. And a lot of that is like kind of held in the thinking part of the brain. We can change that. We can teach you the history. We can have those conversations, but the deeper stuff, the stuff that's like really deeply rooted in the lower parts of our brain, and in all of those little microaggressions and all of those little moments and all of the information that is fed to us through media, through our parents, through culture, and through white supremacy that is invasive and pervasive everywhere, that those things are much more difficult to unroot and undo. And even when you think you got them, they find their way back in. they weave back in. So I'm curious, like from this ongoing standpoint and the long conversations that you have, how do you continue to keep safety, as Megan was saying, make sure people are not being put in positions where they're vulnerable and harmed, but that they are vulnerable and open in a way that feels healing and ongoing?
So that's a great question. I think first thing is, as Kamal talked about, our community. So at the end of each day, we have a reflection board. And we give to the group. They give reflections just to get it out, to say what they need to say. They can be anonymous posts or just a Padlet board. And what we find is that day one is a very heavy lift at the beginning of our conversation. And everybody goes through that to feel those feelings and feel the vulnerabilities, and they shared or they didn't share, what they put in the chat, all the different things. So as we take them through the 3 days, there's a different reflection at the end of each of those days. You see, because we're putting the time in, like Megan said, it's not a quick, we're going to show you this for 2 hours, give you a checklist, you're going to feel better. No, because we're taking you through a day of, we're taking you through a conversation, 24 hours or a week to reflect, another conversation, 24 hours or a week to reflect, day 3. So the process alone is healing. Because if you decide to keep showing up, then you decided, and you're getting what you need to get from it to take you through it. Because here's the thing, at the end of the 3 days, we invite you back again, and we invite you back again, and we invite you back again, and we invite you back again with all your new friends who are going through the same exact thing you're going through. Here's the thing that where the disconnect of with your other point about, we give people the information and they're no longer ignorant about it, but what makes it stick or what makes it meaningful, and the word that comes up for me is empathy. You see, people go through, I can't understand this. White people can understand racism. Just like you can understand calculus. You just study it, you learn, you find the facts, you find the applications, you figure it out. So we can understand it. Experiencing is different. Experience is where the disconnect with empathy comes from. It's hard to, but when you want to put yourself in it, when I say experience it through the music, we have music as part of our resources, our soundtrack. When you can connect with the soul of the issue, that it's not just a piece of paper, but it's a life behind every one of these stories. When you start to connect with the empathy of it, now you become a changed being. Now your mind and your heart get involved, and then your hands get involved, and you start to do stuff. So that's what we promote. We're not. It's not a gotcha. We don't want you to show up and say, look what's going on. That's not going to help anybody. We're trying to learn how to heal this country through a conversation and through actions that support reversing the effects of these things that have happened. And whoever wants to be a part of that joins that, we're all building. I have learned and grown. This is not something I had in the pocket. I've been waiting to show people and I'm an expert on. I never talked to this many white people before in my life.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I'm wondering about that, Kyle. I think, and I've heard this from other people of color who I've worked with around bringing diversity and equity inclusion initiatives forward, that it actually can be incredibly challenging to work with white people as they're coming to understand the impact of bias, racism, white supremacy in this country. And it can be really, really painful, draining, enraging. I mean, I can give all sorts of adjectives around it. So how do you both hold that space and continue to show up for that conversation?
You want that?
So we love when we get on our calls and work with our community. I mean, it would be, Kyle and I would have passed out. I mean, we're spending hours and hours of our lives in these conversations these past 11 and a half months, because for us, it's empowering. It's a two-way, it's not a yelling match. It's a discourse that we believe will form, I know it sounds corny, a more perfect union, but we see, it's interesting when you have someone who may have gone through a long talk from last September, and every month we're asking, hey, watch this movie. Let's meet up and let's talk about the United States versus Billie Holiday. Let's talk about Concrete Cowboys. Let's talk about When They See Us. Why don't you guys read Cass and let's talk. So we're seeing people that we're building friendships with that we would have never met. And I always tell them this: if my grandmother had seen this, if my mom would say, you know what, Kamal, it's going to take generations to fix. Be patient. My grandmother would say it will take generations to fix. But to see all these faces on a Zoom call, people from all different backgrounds, athletic directors, professors, engineering, like people who are in our community, mayors, retired police chiefs, to see these individuals working, learning together, it's inspiring. It's hopeful. Because for a long time, as Black, we felt like it was just us. We didn't know who we could trust. We didn't know who was going to show up and really work. But when we see people showing up from last year, every month, having these conversations just for an hour, if it's a lunchtime discussion on reparations, or one of our talks is why you can't touch my hair, and we had a professor from University of Washington. We have these conversations, but these are people that we're meeting, and it's empowering both ways. It's not just a one-way street. So Kyle, I know I went off on a tangent a little bit, but that
No, that's helpful. That's great, because it's something I wondered about, because I just know that for some folks it just becomes too much, and so it's helpful to hear that that for you, that this is an empowering experience.
So I'll give, and it is, and when we show up and we're there, it is so much. It is very much an empowering experience. But I do recognize the other side of that, and I think I talk to people who literally say, "You're doing what for how what?" It's like especially personality. They know my personality. Like, you what? And what I realized, one of the things I learned early in this was there's a quote from Denzel Washington on Twitter one day, and it said, "Everything changed when I realized you are my lesson and not my enemy."
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it changed actually the whole course of a long talk, but it also changed my approach to this. And when I realized that that I can engage in a conversation where I'm trying to learn how to best help you understand what you need to understand. I'm a teacher. I've been I'm an educator first. So my idea is think of it this way. You have a classroom of people at all different levels, but who really, really want to hear what you have to say, that really, really want to engage every single day. And so if you show up for that classroom as a teacher, if I'm a teacher, I know I go to work every day and I know my kids are engaged, they're going to be there, they're going to be attentive, they're going to participate, they're going to put stuff in the chat, they're going to feel the emotion, they're going to go through all that. I don't have to be frustrated with them. So I don't have to deal with a lot of what other people are dealing with trying to help white people. That's much more frustrating than mine. I couldn't do what a lot of people are doing as DEI people in mandatory settings. Like one of the best things about our program is I would never have it be mandatory. Wherever we go, it's not mandatory. I don't want to talk to everybody. Everybody doesn't want to talk to me. Everybody, I don't want to talk to everybody. So that's fine because we don't need everybody to end racism. We didn't need everyone to stop smoking to push secondhand smokers outside. We didn't need them, right? So it's fine. The ones that show up, we will work with. But the idea of keeping your mental health together around having this conversation is about that quote from Denzel gives me patience when I deal with white people. And here's the thing, I don't necessarily do the heavy lifting. I show up and say what I have to say and give them a break to reflect and do their homework. Well, a lot of it is it's like just like a teacher. I don't have to go home with them and do the homework. I'm going to show up tomorrow and give my lesson, and then the heavy lift really is on them, and I'm going to support exactly what they need. So
I definitely, I as an educator myself, I saw the organization of a long talk, and I was like, oh, that's a person who's been a teacher. Like it's very, in the best compliment possible. That I think you have a way in the program of laying out information that builds skills over time, that helps people to be able to start to understand the concepts that are being shared. And I've seen a lot of professional development in my day, DEI as well, where that, like, those connections get missed and therefore it gets hard for folks to connect. So I just want to, as a teacher, say that I love seeing what you taught, but also the fact that there's an open and ongoing invitation to continue to connect, I just think is really powerful.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned is the trust, right? That trust, because people keep coming back on their own and that they're voluntarily. And when you have that, it makes it easier to open up, and it provides the safety and foundational piece you need in order to offer grace and accept grace. Grace has been a word that's really been on top for me lately, and I'm not,
No, me too.
It feels really resonant right in this moment, right? Because we all need grace. As a white woman who has worked my entire career in communities of color, as a mental health provider. And I think when you talk about the scaffolding and education primarily, but when you think about both education and what you have done in creating safety and relationship and belonging and activation to the emotional, visceral piece of this, right? This is visceral. I think, as Kamal said at the beginning, we feel it in our whole body. And as a white woman, I cannot understand the visceral experience of being a person of color in a world that is white supremacist, but I can feel visceral pain in the relationship with the people that I love and care about. And so recognizing that what you've done is create this space where people can be in real relationship and authentic relationship and real connection, and offer grace to each other as you learn through and wade through the historical torture and trauma that this country is founded on. It's really powerful.
Well, it lives in the body, right? So I think there's plenty of evidence now that, historical trauma also lives in the body. So it is very much a bodily experience as well as one that's mental. We're at our break point again. And when we come back, what I'd love to talk about is I know there's an action part. So you're saying you're making activists, and I love, it's the other part of what I love about, I think it's in your mission statement around you want anti-racist at every dinner table. So I think that it would be great to hear about that part and and you mentioned it already a little bit, like, now what are you going to do about it? Because that's another piece that often gets lost. So when we come back, I'd love to hear about how you're turning your participants into activists. Are you ready to change the way we do school? Yeah, me too. This is Megan Sweet from The Awakening Educator, and I've designed programming that empowers educators to reimagine how they approach their work. The pandemic has laid bare what most of us already knew. Our schools are under-resourced. Our system is set up to fail our most vulnerable students. Our educators are burned out and overwhelmed, and we all deserve better. With almost 30 years in education and 15 dedicated to leading school reform, I have been there and I get it. I've sat in the same seats that many of you have. I've been a classroom teacher and a school administrator. I've led district, county, and statewide reforms. I've coached dozens of teachers, principals, and executive leaders, and I've partnered with students, parents, and community activists. I have the scars from a lifetime of scrapping out in education, but also the lived experience that change is possible. After facing the prospect of quitting education myself, I began a journey to understand how I could stay in the profession I love, but do it in a way that was sustainable. Here's what I now know. It begins with self-care. Prioritizing ourselves can feel counterintuitive for educators, but when we give without attending to our own needs, eventually we run out of resources and burnout ensues. But when we stop fighting the system and instead look inward for the answers we seek, we live more empowered lives and are better able to create the educational settings where our students will thrive. Here's what I also know. We already have the answers inside of us, we just sometimes need help getting them out. And that's where I come in. I love supporting educators to find their inner voice and match all those school smarts with their innate instincts about what works best for students. My superpowers are listening well, synthesizing ideas, and breaking complex processes into understandable and accessible parts. How will we do it? It all starts with doing what I call self-work, dedicating time and attention to building a relationship with ourselves. We do this in a course I call the Beliefs Lab. By the end of this course, you'll understand why self-care is essential for being an effective educator, and you'll have strategies you can use right now. You will also get a handle on some of those beliefs that are helping you and those that are getting in the way. The next step is doing the schoolwork, leading classroom and school change. In the course I call The Cycle, you will learn a process for realizing goals for yourself and for your educational context simultaneously. You will also have deeper insights and strategies for putting your plans into action. Want more support as you engage in this self-work and schoolwork? I've got you covered. My personalized coaching and consulting services are designed to meet you in your school right where you are and support you to clarify your vision for the future. Want to know even more about what I do? My book is a great place to start. An Educator's Guide for Using Your 3 Eyes details the self-work and schoolwork that I described above and talks about concrete ways that you can start to feel better right now. If you want to learn more about how to work with me in the courses I just described, please come to my website, www.your3eyes.com. That's YOUR3EYES.com. I can't wait to support you to realize a better future for yourself and for your school community.
Welcome back. We are so excited to have Kyle and Kamal of A Long Talk. We were talking about how it lives in the body before we went on break and really looking into what is the action step. And I also wanted to link it to what Kamal said earlier around, like, we move and dance and sports and physical activity to move some of this stuff through our body and connecting it to both the relationship piece. So I'm really curious about the action. And Megan was asking questions about what are those action items? How do we engage our community to get involved?
Okay. I think one of the first things that I realized with this is that, action is an individual choice, right? And so when you think about what I can do, when I told this story and I talked about BJ Dunn deciding that, he was just going to do something. He was going to go make a change with the way they spent their money when they traveled. And so it was a personal choice. And so for us, it's not a particular, our action plan is we give them things. We want to continue to spread the word. We want to continue for them to connect us with people that want to spread the word. But the individual action is step up to your own front line. Like one of the themes is white people to the front. When we're really talking about putting a dent in this, and dismantling white supremacy, white people have to step up to the front of that. Right? And, whether you talked about names before, to be honest, Black people have given enough blood, sweat, and lives to destroy white supremacy. We've done enough, right? We will never stop, and that's just who I'm going to be. So,
I want to add that our Pillars of Change program is the anchor, and that's part of our action piece. Because after people go through the 3-day conversation with us, we invite them to join our Pillars of Change, and this is important because a lot of times the action, sometimes there's people who are absorbing a lot of information this past year, and it's sometimes so much is not segmented. And so what we felt, and I'll let Kyle kind of talk about how our Pillars of Change program came about, but this is our touch point every month. And once people finish a long talk, yes, we offer a discussion on books quarterly, movies. Every month we do a movie discussion. Every month we have one lunchtime discussion. But this Pillars of Change is the launch portion of our action piece because of the way we have. Kyle, just take this is very important because this is what we leave behind. Just like Kyle said, we just don't have the conversation. People don't go through 3 days with us on a long talk and that's it. This piece here is deliberate and intentional. Kyle can explain to you how that is the onboarding or the launch pad for the action piece.
Yep. And so with that personal responsibility, we want to provide structure for that. Like if you want to do, people just don't know how to just turn on the switch sometimes. So with the Pillar of Change, it's a monthly touch point that we do. Let me back up for a second. When we were working with the University of Pennsylvania, we finished our conversation with them and we were going to continue to work with them, but they're like, what do we do? How do we stay organized? What is our point of contact? And I said, well, instead of me, the POC, being your point of contact, why don't you all become pillars of change in your community? And then we'll stay connected and you all begin the changes that you want to see. And so through that conversation, we developed a curriculum of sorts, but it's more so just a guiding structure of information and conversation. And so every single month we meet one time with the group, about 90 minutes. And we've had our group right now is about 90 people that are in the Pillars of Change program. And so we meet once a month and we're going to talk about the first quarter of the year, we did crime and punishment. So we took a deep dive into crime and punishment, understanding it, reading the new Jim Crow, watching 13th, having conversations around it, and then being able to do some action points around, do you know who your DA is? Do you understand how the laws and people that are in place? If you have a sheriff, do you understand how the crime and punishment in your local area works? And so people dove in and did some research and understood their work. For the third month that we do in that quarter, we had a guest speaker come in, someone who was a former DA, went to school with Kamal and I at Hampton University, Kenneth Montgomery, and is now a criminal defense lawyer representing death row cases. And he came and he spoke to him about what it really feels like in real life when there's disparity in that. So that deeper dive just allows them to stay activated to then go do whatever they need to do. And what we mean by that, I'll give you an example. Coming out of that first quarter, we always tell our folks to continue to let people know that we're here. Continue to invite people. We have a standing monthly community call that anybody can join us right on our website. You don't have to be connected to any school or any organization that we're working with. You can come on and get in our community call. We had some people that went through the crime and punishment, and then on our next community call in April, we had a councilwoman from Atlanta, Georgia, and the deputy chief of police from Atlanta, Georgia, went through a long talk because she activated, said, I'm going to use my voice until she started to work. And that's the kind of activism that we're talking about. It's not, it ranges. People have a lot of buttons they can push, emails they can send, power they have, but it really comes down to being able to, wherever your front line is, just step up to it and then do what you can do.
And Megan, it's important too, because each quarter, January, February, and March, that was crime and punishment. April, May, and June has been educational inequalities. We always start, just like our 3-day format, with a long talk. That first month, when we're dealing with that inequality, we're looking at it from an informational perspective, right? The second month, we're coming in, we're practicing. What can we do? I mean, can you write to your local school board? who do you know, or what does it look like in your community? And the third month, we do have the guest speakers, but we also have the community share out, because maybe one person did this in Pennsylvania, maybe someone did this in Iowa. And in between that time, they're in affinity groups, accountability groups of 10 to 12, all across the country, all professions. These individuals are communicating off our call. They have their own little teams, and they're figuring out what's happening in my area. What can I do? I mean, Kyle had this retired women in where's that, Boca Raton, who are meeting with the National Urban League. Who would have thought that would happen? And I don't know if I'm even telling them right, but Kyle, that's a byproduct of yeah.
One last thing, just another piece I'll add to this to show you, and I'm probably gonna. This is probably gonna get us on somebody's radar tomorrow. But we had there's a quote in one of my favorite movies, The Black Klansman. It says, "Anything's possible with the right white man." Right. Mm-hmm. So that goes into this thinking of that whatever your front line is, whatever you can do to reach out, whatever you can do. So we spoke to someone that went through a conversation, a long talk, and I spoke with this person afterwards, and we were talking about stepping up to the front line. And this person was talking about how they were engaged in certain things and believing in certain things, but they didn't realize when they heard Coach Dunn talk about all Black everything by supporting Black businesses, that for the last 6 or 7 years, they've single-handedly been in charge of their corporation's $180,000 hospitality budget. And so their thinking was, I spend this every year this is what I'm able to do. So why would not I divert some of this and not and spend some of this with Black businesses? Mm-hmm. And so when you think about, that's not a front. I couldn't write that down and say, go into your direct fund. That's not going. I have no idea the person we're talking to. So as they line up, it's literally like battery. Let's go.
Well, yeah. I'm curious about, because you started with sports and teams, right? You started with coaches and teams, and I was really surprised when you first told us the story that. I would think that teams would be places where some of those relationships that are happening across difference are changing things. But from your story, it really wasn't. That those conversations weren't happening. Young people were showing up and they were playing sports together, but they weren't really engaging across relationship. And there's so much money and structure that sports brings in our country. And the money that you were just talking about, how powerful that is, that a coach can make that decision around their budget, and that budgets across industries, including sports, can change the way that the structure of white supremacy happens in this country. And so how can so you're doing this at the Division I universities, prestigious schools around the country, as well as local schools. How can maybe we encourage coaches in high schools, coaches at middle schools, coaches on Papuana, and all of these other spaces where young people, it's some of the few diverse spaces that kids are coming together, but they show up, they play sports, and they go home into their neighborhoods. And I'm wondering, is there a conversation about bringing this to a earlier, when the brains are still more malleable, when we can start to have these important conversations earlier?
So I say yes to all of that, because this conversation is for everyone. And so our on-ramp was sports, but we have like, for instance, when we start talking about young people, teens, we just did a session at the junior NBA conference. So this is 6th, 7th, and 8th graders and the people that support basketball at that level. Because the bottom line is, young or old, none of us are taught and prepared to have this conversation.
Yeah.
So because of that, there's no expertise even in having the conversation yet. We're literally building the expertise in having this conversation, and we've gotten involved at a high level. So,
I think that's profound, Kyle, because I think something that you said that for me just resonates, or also just for white folks listening, like, number one, white supremacy is a white person's problem. So I agree. And it's our job to dismantle that and to learn. But also, I just love this concept of choose your front line and do something, because that it puts the onus back on the individual as well, right? So we have to, and I think for a lot of white people, the front line is acknowledging that we have bias in the first place. So that's the front line that I talk a lot about, and I talk about use of mindfulness and other things that help us to be able to even acknowledge for ourselves that we have a bias in there. in our minds that's showing up in how we're seeing or perceiving or experiencing other people. So I think often that's frontline number one. And Kamal, you mentioned that, like, right, you have to like work with yourself first. And then what can I do in my community? What is within my power and my control to make a change? And no size, so I love this idea of diverting money that you already have towards Black-owned businesses. That's a very simple, real, and impactful decision. But everyone has lots of different places. Those front lines are different. For me, I happen to be a school board member. So my front line, I get to speak at the school board on a regular basis. But I think for each person it's different, and it provides an opportunity, including within our own families, which again, this is this concept that to me, I think is so powerful, which is like, and it's at the dinner table. It's with our children, with our family members. I attempted to talk this weekend with one of my family members. Multiple ones of us didn't go super well, but I'm committed to continuing to show up to that conversation.
Did you use the 3-hour protocol? Did you use the 3-hour protocol?
I did not. I was, it was a close. See, this is probably why.
I'm just saying it works.
I jumped right in and I created havoc.
That's why. But we're so conditioned to have this conversation one way, to either not have it at all or to have it at high octave.
Right.
And deeply roots, right?
Can you share the protocol too? Can you share what that is with the protocol?
We have to when you come through a long talk, we get the protocol. But essentially is this, as simple as this. People will argue facts, but they'll answer questions. And would you rather be in a conversation where you're arguing facts or just having someone answer questions? And so people just need to be accountable for their own thoughts, their own ideas, and they need to just own those ideas and then understand the impact of them. One of the things you said people have to recognize their own bias. And that's I think, like, when someone asked me, well, we were doing the talking, they're like, we're doing a kind of a sales meeting. They said, do you talk about microaggressions? And I said, well, I kind of talk about white supremacy. And so I just feel like all that's going to fall under the umbrella, right, at some point. And so when you think about your bias or I think if white people look at it and say, you know what, I just have a deficit of information and empathy on this issue. I'm going to approach it every day. Like every day, I'm going to find some new information and find something else that's going to resonate with my spirit about this. So bias goes away when you have information and empathy. I just think that's a good place to start with that.
I'm dominating the conversation now. I'm hearing myself, but I want to respond to this too, which is what you're naming. You said two things that I think are really important, which is it's when we meet it with aggression, either to ourselves or to another person, it tends to shut us down. And we have good biological reasons for that too. Fight, flight, freeze, like literally just our reasoning starts to shut down. Yeah. But actually what we wanted to do is have open doors and with ourselves as well. So I just love that intrapersonal reframe of like, what am I going to learn? How am I going to just, and from, maybe I put a label of curiosity on that. How can I be curious and learn? And when we engage with others, I did try to be gentle, Kyle. It just didn't go well. But
I didn't say be gentle. So you can see the 3-hour protocol allows you to be forceful with your questions. You have to be gentle. You have to just ask challenging questions. And so that's the skill. But
I did that.
We're getting ready to start. So we're getting ready to start. You'll get an email. We're getting ready to start doing monthly practice sessions, 2 a month, one in the day, one in the evening, where our community is going to just show up and do 3-hour protocol practice, so that we can continue to use our voice. You have to practice this. You can't go from not having the convo to then, because it represents we're not ready. We have to be ready. So I expect to see you at practice, Megan.
I wanted to, Sheikah is out there giving a lot of love, and they are doing some of this work, Sheikah and Tammy, on Create and Educate. So she was, I just wanted to recognize they are using their dollars, elevate authors of color at their school and elementary school, and helping them learn how to navigate the systems to be able to get their books sold in elementary schools. And I think that's a perfect example of one of the ways in which the system wasn't necessarily trying to keep people out, but it does because of all of the systems that are there. And that was another example. And she's giving you a lot of love here on Facebook. So we are coming up on the last 5 minutes of our long. It was definitely not long enough. We need to be joining the conversation monthly. I'm so incredibly humbled by the work that you're doing, the wellspring of conversation that continues to grow both virtually and in communities, and bringing it to the local level as well as the national level. And I think that's what's making this really powerful, is that it is simplistic, but it's asking people to step up to their own front line. And I'm going to continue to resonate on that and reflect on that, because I have my own front line. So I have to leave this conversation. And I think that's the important thing, is anyone who sits in conversation with you guys needs to be able to then walk away and say, okay, I better find my front line. I've been challenged in a way that is a gift. And so I'm going to step up to it. And I'm wondering in closing, if you'd like to share where folks can find a long talk, how they can get involved, how they can get training, how could they bring it to their organization? What are the ways to connect with you guys?
I'm gonna let Kamal answer that in 1 second, but I do want to add one piece I left out, and you remind me with the educators that are listening. We just started. We talked about the institutions and colleges we work with. We've been working with nonprofits, but we just started working with school districts and school systems. And so we've actually worked with. We had a call today actually with Chambersburg Area School District in Pennsylvania. We worked with Charles City, Iowa, Martha's Vineyard Public Schools. I think we're in one more, Quaker Valley in Pennsylvania. We're working with shortly, and we're working on programming year-long PD with school systems right now. So as Kamal talks about how you can reach out and get information, that is something that we're excited about getting into. My team is full of educators, and we're excited about being able to have an impact in classrooms and in districts and all kinds of things with some really great programs. So I'll let Kamal go take that.
I will say, having people go through a long talk is a foundational piece. And you can find us on our website at alongtalk.com. And our social media handle is alongtalk2020. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, alongtalk 2020. And we chose that because we have a 15-year game plan to erase racism and dismantle white supremacy. And we started the clock at 2020. So we're at alongtalk 2020. We post our information there. But what we encourage people to do is every month, that community call that Kyle mentioned, if you have family, aunties, uncles, relatives, coworkers, you can send them to our website and they can join our community call. And that's impactful. We feel like that's helping, usher in a change. But in order for us to reach the masses, we don't have to remind you that when you saw January taking place, there are millions of people who are, it's just amazing what's been able to, not amazing, it's by design and it's intentional. And until we have productive conversation and we're able to take that conversation and put action behind it, there are millions of people that some are deeply entrenched in their hatred, some are some just they don't even know what they don't know, inconscious and competent. And so in order for us to have these productive conversations, share with your friends and family and have them join our community call. But from a corporate level, if you have a VP, a CEO that you live next door to, or a friend who's in a decision-making position at an organization, we work with corporations, universities. We are in talks with Little League and national coaching organizations that if you know decision makers, put us in contact with them. Help us do a warm email introduction. You can contact us through our website, but we will talk to anyone, conversation to educate, to end hate. And so that's on a bigger level. If there is someone in that seat that can push the button and say, hey, look, have 500 employees show up or 1,000 people show up, that's how we get to the million, because there's millions of people out here who need this. And that's our goal, is to have an anti-racist at every dinner table. So
that's profound. I'm so grateful that both of you have been on. I'm so grateful for your program. Everyone, please check out A Long Talk. I love that. Find your front line and start right there. It's brilliant. And I think that should be a T-shirt. And then if it's a T-shirt, then I'm going to buy it. So,
Got you.
I'm not good at
Swag.
designing
A
things.
long talk
I'm just
swag.
saying,
Swag. All right.
I'm after it.
We'll add that to our check. We'll add it to our checklist. End racism, get swag. All right, we're good.
That's right. There you go. Thank you both so much. It's such an honor.
We are so proud of this being able to engage in this conversation and want to grow the conversation and talk about equity and awakening our education to be more inclusive and thoughtful and able to engage in complex, difficult, uncomfortable conversations. Thank you guys so much. So appreciative of joining us today. It was really a gift.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
everybody.
We appreciate you for having us and using your voice and your platform to get it out. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator